All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the STEM Careers in Television Production panel. We're so happy that you're here, and we're joined by our wonderful partners at New Mexico PBS. And I'm going to toss this right away to Franz Joachim, General Manager at New Mexico PBS, and a wonderful partner with us to start off the panel.
Well, good day to everybody. Thanks for joining us. I am the General Manager and CEO at New Mexico PBS. I've been in television broadcasting for 45-ish years, so I've seen a lot of interesting technical transitions. I did get a degree in radio television. I actually started as an engineering major. I failed as an engineering major. We'll get into some of that a little later because I think it's germane to what we're going to be talking about today. But Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit, give us your name and title and your short path here, because we're going to get into detail on the longer path, but your short path to this point.
Absolutely. So hi, my name is Anthony Lostetter. I'm the production manager here at New Mexico PBS, and I have a background in, I have a bachelor's of science and with an emphasis on exercise science and physical education. And so I was really interested in this field of video production, television production. In high school, I had a really great high school program where I went out and made news stories and documentaries and experimental video, and I even broke some equipment. So I really loved that in high school. And then I got through college and went to a community college actually, and was studying 3D animation and graphics design. And I went to a job fair and I actually met Franz there, and he gave me my first opportunity in TV. So that was really exciting.
That was a while ago, my friend.
Absolutely. I've been here 17 years. I started as an intern, and I've had five promotions since then.
Laura, tell us about your path. How'd you get to where we are today?
Hi everyone, so I'm the environment reporter at New Mexico PBS, and I've only been working in TV a very brief amount of time, a few years. I think our program is 4 years old, or be 5 years this summer. But I've been a reporter, a science and environment reporter for 20 years. And my background, my education was in anthropology, which really doesn't have anything to do with what I do now. And yeah, that's what I do.
Great, thank you. Ashley, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Ashley Ramelsberg. I'm the manager of multimedia services here at New Mexico PBS. I have a background in photography, and I got my degree from UNM in that. But I've always been really into websites and the internet and social media. So in 2014, I was able to convince these guys that I knew how the internet worked and social media, and they gave me a job doing that. And I've gotten two, as Anthony said, 2 promotions since then. So.
And we still believe she does know what she's doing with the internet. You still got us convinced. Mike, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike Snyder. I'm the studio technology manager at New Mexico PBS, and been with the station a little more than 12 years, I think. I got into broadcasting actually kind of by accident. My grandmother used to tell me stories about my grandfather, who was an engineer at NBC. All kinds of cool stuff because he was there back in kind of the heyday of radio. So I was always intrigued by it, and actually signed up for broadcasting school on a dare. Figured out I liked it, liked the technology and futzing with stuff better than being a disc jockey. So ended up on the technical side, and it's really been intriguing because it's the change has been pretty constant. And I always borrowed Orson Welles' phrase about making movies to describe working in television. The best set of electric trains a boy ever had. I had some pretty cool trains growing up, so still having a good time, and a lot in the way of different projects and things to do within the PBS system. And it's nice because it's a situation where I can be proud of the programming and the signal quality. So on the commercial side, I couldn't always say that.
I hear that. Laura, tell me something. I mean, and I think well, it'll be interesting to hear all of our answers, honestly, but I'm going to just guess that you have probably the most varied experiences in terms of on a day-to-day basis what you run into. So what's something that recently really got you jazzed about what you're doing in television?
Yeah, so just to give an example of like in the past couple of weeks, I have the opportunity to go out in the field. Anthony and I were out in the field earlier this week shooting a piece about a bosque restoration site in Corrales. So we get to be outside in very cold and increasingly windy weather, but like learning really neat stuff from scientists and engineers, to doing studio interviews where I'm just sitting face to face, which I still get to do sometimes, which is wonderful, and getting people to talk about their scientific research, their personal histories, their communities, things like that, to sitting behind a computer or picking up the phone and trying to get people to agree to talk to me. So I get to kind of do a variety of different things, and which is really exciting and good for me. I don't like just sitting at my desk. I think that the best part of being an environment reporter is being outside and learning from scientists and seeing how environmental impacts affect communities. And so my weeks are pretty varied.
So what's one thing that really struck you recently that really was exciting or interesting or just really kind of caught you?
Yeah, so we do all sorts of things where I'm interviewing like politicians and lawmakers and scientists. But recently we went at the story of uranium mining, which is a big part of New Mexico's history. We went at the public health impacts and the environmental impacts of uranium mining on the Laguna Reservation, through the story of one artist whose grandparents grew up, had their home like 1,000 feet from the edge of this open pit uranium mine that was, at one point the world's largest uranium mine. And so at New Mexico PBS, we were able to tell the story of environmental and public health and cultural impacts, but through one person's family and through one person's art. And so that was really exciting for me to engage on a scientific and public health issue on a different level that might attract more the interest of other audience members.
Anthony, how about you? I mean, you have, I know your job. I used to do your job. What I loved about it was every day was different. What recently happened with you that just really kind of caught you and said, this is great?
Well, I'm really excited about working with producers and trying to find a way to tell the story visually. And so I'm thinking about the technology, I'm thinking about the cameras, how we might edit it. I'm always thinking about the audio. And so, I'm really excited about drone photography that we're working with right now. I can't wait to get out in the field. And, what I love is that the stories keep changing, and we really need to kind of learn about these issues so that we can tell the story. And so I need change. I like that my job continues to shift, and we're always talking about different stories, and then the challenge of how to take this vision from, say, like the producer's point of view or the story, and now tell it visually in a way that's hopefully beautiful and compelling, and that gets the information across to the viewer so that we can, hopefully affect some change, inform people and let them kind of make their decisions from the various topics that we cover.
But in all of that stuff that you've been doing over the last 2-3 weeks, and I know you've hit a lot of different things, was there one thing that just kind of stood out that said, yeah, this is why I do this?
Well, I really liked that story about DeHaven, the Laguna artist. It's really, I really like it when we can find environmental impacts or, talk about the legacy of some of the things that have happened in the state through an artistic way through an individual and really make you feel for that person and what kind of situations they've been going through. So that was pretty impactful for me.
Ashley, how about you? What's recently just said, this is why I'm here, this is why I'm doing this?
Yeah, so I'm really fortunate to be on 2 different national PBS committees. And on those committees, I get to help drive like innovation for the PBS system and also with the PBS products. So this morning, for instance, I was fortunate enough to be on in a meeting with folks from PBS who are on like the UX and like development side for the PBS video portal and PBS app, and talk with them about how we can drive more people using the app and more membership in the app. So being able to work with PBS on a national level and really help to drive that innovation as a station, I think is the most exciting thing that I get to do.
That is exciting. Mike, how about you? Actually, you share some of those things because you're on some national committees, but not to answer the question for you, what recently has just taken you and said, wow, that's why I'm doing this?
I think recently it's been a combination of 2 things. One is the new technical standard that we started broadcasting in as a sidebar will soon become our primary service of ATSC 3.0. Simple translation is it lets us broadcast 4K video or better to consumers, and at the same time take that same signal and feed it to the internet. And then rolled in with that same technology is the fact that on what used to be 1 TV channel, we can now broadcast five channels instead of 1 and offer the viewer that much more choice. And, you know, technology-wise, it's just mind-boggling. I've always, and even though I've played on both sides of the fence, you know, a bit of background in production, doing the kind of stuff Anthony was doing, although with coal-powered equipment instead of the cool stuff he gets, is you know, just the fact of how much of a, you know, a story we're telling, and the fact that, you know, I echo whoever said it first, that each day is different and a challenge. I think about what we're doing now and just how much more we can be doing as things progress. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, you know, and that's kind of where I am right now. You know, I've done a lot of stuff, and I wasn't so much interested in telling the stories and the stories themselves is what equipment we were going to use to tell those stories and how best to figure out how to use it. I'm so jealous that Anthony has drones and I didn't have drones. I am so jealous of that. I really am. But having, I mean, honestly, my inspiration for getting into television was they had the coolest toys. I mean, kind of like what Mike said early on, they had really cool toys and lots of different ones. And working in public television, because they had more access to more different toys than even the commercial guys did. So that's kind of one of the reasons. It was not a philosophical bent towards public media initially. I grew that passion. My passion was they got a lot of really cool toys and I want to be able to play with them. And that's really kind of what got me into television was, you know, like Anthony, I had a high school teacher who got me into it. She was dating a guy who worked at a television repair shop and got some equipment donated, and she started a little television studio in 1976. So we started doing black and white, you know, television in high school, and that's kind of what got me started. And then along with Mike, though, now what gets me excited is all this transition from back when I started where videotape was brand new, and literally one of my first jobs was getting rid of all the films and moving all the films out of the way, to now where we're talking about how do we make broadcast television and the internet the same thing? So they're not these 2 separate things, they're the same thing. And then even as of yesterday, now taking how we do television and figuring out ways where we're now actually sending internet stuff to students' homes for students who don't have internet. We're figuring out how to get them internet stuff when they don't have internet. And you know, lots of folks in New Mexico don't have access to internet or don't have access to enough. And now we're able to get them stuff and send literally to, you know, student A in Mrs. Jones' English class, stuff from Mrs. Jones for her English class to that one student. And we're figuring out how to do that. And we get to be a big part of these fundamental changes in an industry that impacts everybody every day. So Laura, I'm going to circle back to you. What advice do you have for a pre-college student who might be interested in pursuing a career in media? What kind of advice would you give them?
So I think the best advice I ever got was to learn about and explore the things that you're really interested in and really curious about, and kind of, in a way, like becoming an expert in that field. And then you can kind of learn how to translate that information for the public at large, or to be a watchdog for the public, or, you know, whatever kind of branch of journalism you decide to go into. And I think that that has been really good. That was really good advice for me, because I love the issues that I cover. I mean, I hate issues like pollution and things like that, but I love the communities I cover and the landscapes and ecosystems that I cover. And I'm like endlessly curious about what's happening, how to do things better, how to make good decisions. And so that keeps me engaged and excited, and kind of willing to wade through maybe some of the not so great parts of being a journalist. And so I think like finding what you're excited about and interested in, and always being driven to continue learning more, was really the best thing for me.
So as a high school student, did anything in high school prepare you for this, or were you looking at this as a high school student as a possible career? What steps did you take in high school that might have helped lead you to where you are?
Yeah, so since the time I was in middle school, I wanted to be a writer, and I kind of assumed that I would follow a path where I would be an English major, and I would travel the world sitting in cafes and smoking cigarettes and writing travelogues or something like that. And I had a teacher who said, if you want to be a writer, the worst thing you can do is go to college and be an English major and learn how to criticize everybody else's writing. Go and learn something about the world, experience the world, and then maybe you'll have something interesting to write about. And again, like, I wish I could remember who that was who told me that, because it was fantastic advice, and I think continues to carry me, because it is important to be a good writer and a good communicator. But as a journalist, you're also working with editors, you're working with videographers, you're working as part of a team. And so you can always build kind of those technical skills along the way.
And did you have some kind of inspiration, or anybody in particular inspired? I mean, you mentioned that one teacher who told you to go smoke cigarettes. Don't go smoke cigarettes. Don't do that. Ignore that part of what Laura said, but everything else I think she's spot on about. Was there a singular inspiration or anything like that?
Yeah, I had a teacher in 7th grade who I was like super, I don't know why, like why in the 1980s I was obsessed with the Vietnam War, but I had put together this research project about the Vietnam War that was really focused on exactly how the media covered the Vietnam War and how that affected American understanding and response to the war. And so I like pulled this whole research project together in 7th grade and presented it to the class and wrote up a research paper. And I just remember Mrs. McGowan said, "You are a good writer." And it was maybe the first time somebody had said something like that. And she was like, "You're a good writer, and you have a way of, you were able to take a complex subject and break it down in a way that your fellow students could understand." And so I think, like, thanks, Mrs. McGowan, like the things that teachers say to kids when they're young, like truly, truly matter.
Yeah, Adrian Pagel, building a TV station in my high school. No, seriously, teachers make a difference. Teachers make a huge difference in kids' lives. Anthony, how about you? Let's start with, what would you give a high school student or a pre-college student? What kind of advice would you give them if they're interested in pursuing a career in media?
Well, my initial thought is that it's really important to just follow your passion. Find those things that really spark your interest and run with them. Because if you're not interested, it's really hard to want to pay attention. So, it's so important to just find those things that you just really are engaged in, and let that take it wherever it goes, because we know that as long as you're interested in something and you want to learn more about it and want to learn everything about it, and you get deeper and deeper and further, that's just going to be great for you. Because, you know, I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner, and I want to continue to be curious about things. And you know, I started to feel a little bit like I was getting interested in very diverse things. I would get really into something and I would go in that direction, and then I'd see something else over here and I'd get interested in that, and I would follow that. And I started to worry, like, am I having too many different diverse kind of interests? But I really feel like all those things came back together for me, and someday those different interests might really make a lot of sense to you, and it might actually make you really well equipped for the specific thing that you end up doing. So, you know, I really am really excited about things, and I think that that's what could be the best motivating factor for young people: being curious, taking things apart, breaking things. You know, Franz talks a little bit about our toys. Well, I work really hard to try and call these tools. You know, these are tools. We're working really hard. But, you know, if you think that what you're doing is fun, and if you think what the things that you're working with are toys, you know, that's really special. And you know, I'm really lucky to think that I am working with toys. I'm excited about the things we use. And you know, I like to understand how they work. And, you know, there's a lot of science in some of this stuff. And sometimes it's a little bit daunting, but, you know, when you start to just even break the surface on some of these things, it can be really endlessly fascinating.
And I think, I think that following a passion is really important. Now, not all of us have those passions at that point in life. And, you know, my passion didn't turn out to be what I actually ended up doing. I mean, I was going to be an engineer, and I was really passionate about, I thought I was, about building stuff. But as you say, I mean, a lot of that was also taking things apart and figuring out how they work. And then when it came right down to it, you know, I really didn't like the work that I was doing as an engineer. I really found that when I actually got into engineering, for me, that ended up being kind of boring, because it wasn't about, for me, about designing the stuff that people were going to use. It was more about using the stuff that engineers had designed. So that's where I had to figure that out. I had to make that break myself, and break away from the idea that I want to be this engineer who designs and creates things, to I want to be somebody who uses those tools to create other stuff. And then you go even further to help other people create stuff with those tools and help them use them better. So it all is kind of also the evolution of a passion. And if you don't even have that passion, then all I can suggest is go out and do stuff, and you'll find one. A passion will find you. Ashley, how about you? What advice do you have for, you know, pre-college students who are interested in media?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Anthony was saying about being curious. You know, and I in high school, I mean, I just wanted to do art. Like that's all I wanted to do. And I was not good at math, and not good at chemistry, and not good at science. But I loved photography. But so much of photography is chemistry and science. And it was really my love for photography that I was like, oh, I guess I have to learn how solutions work, because I need to mix these photochemicals, you know? So I think, you know, you couldn't pry me out of the dark room when I was in high school. I lived in there. And I think, you know, really like following my passion has been so important for me. You know, I didn't go to college thinking like, oh, I'm going to get a degree in art and then make $1 million a year. Like that was, my goal was to go to college and learn how to make art because I love making art, and then figure it out afterwards. And, you know, I think that my curiosity has really led me into this career, and I feel so fortunate for that. Even though, you know, kind of what Laura's saying, like, you know, it's just so different from where you started, right? Like, I wouldn't stress too much, like, this is what I want to be when I grow up. Because I feel like that was, even when I graduated college, everyone was like, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I don't know. I have a degree in photography, and it was right after the recession happened. You know, I had no idea. You know, so I was a waitress for a while, and I took pictures and I tried to figure it out, you know, but I think it's okay to not know. and just like follow your passion and follow what you want to do. And for me, that ended up being this, and I'm, you know, PBS for life now. But.
So how did that transition happen? Because you were talking about, well, first off, you're talking about photography and using chemicals, which isn't kind of how photography is done anymore. Maybe, I mean, I know there are people who still do that, but by and large, photography doesn't involve that. But even more than that, you're really, I mean, you're our expert. You're one of our technology experts, actually. You are our webmaster, right? So that whole side of what is fair for broadcast television, a relatively new thing, another way to take what we've done this way for decades, and now we're doing it this way, and you're kind of our leader on that in many ways. How did you make this transition from being, you know, a photographer in a dark room with chemicals and a waitress to our webmaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I really learned in college was problem solving. You know, so it wasn't so much like, how do I technically do this? But if I want a photo to look like this, how do I make that happen and solve that problem? And I think that that problem solving has translated itself into web design. You know, like I said, I was really fortunate. I've been making websites on my own since I was a kid, and I had geosites pages featuring my Beanie Babies, you know. And so, you know, then in college, you know, I've always been really logically minded. You know, and in college, I worked for Apple, and I was a senior technical support advisor for them. And I learned a lot of computer skills during that process, and it really, you know, tickled my brain in a different way, because I love that logical piece, and I've always loved that logical piece of things. And I think that for me, web design is really the perfect balance between like logical computer work and getting to be creative. I still get to employ my photo skills every single day. I open Photoshop every single day on my computer. I have to edit photos every day. You know, I'm still utilizing those skills in a different way from what I learned. You know, but I mean, really, I taught myself web design. Like, I went online and found videos and watched them and learned from, you know, different mentors on YouTube and on other video sites and Khan Academy, and just dug in, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And then I taught myself. So I think that might answer your question, Franz.
That does. Mike, how about you? Let's start back a little bit. Advice that you would have for, you know, students who are pre-college and maybe going to college or maybe going into another path. What advice do you have?
Well, I think it would kind of echo what both Anthony and Ashley had said about, you know, the first off, curiosity, and chasing whatever, you know, whatever interests you. And if you don't know what interests you, so try a couple of different things. You know, worst that happens is you learned, okay, this isn't for me, I need to move on to something else. Best thing is, hey, this is kind of cool. You know, I wonder if I can get paid for this. And it's just, you know, to keep chasing that, and don't ever let anyone define a limit for you and say, oh, well, because you've majored in video production, you can't touch technology, or vice versa. You know, I wish I had a nickel for every time I had somebody say, oh, engineers can't do that. And it's because so much of the time it was crossover of, yeah, my title was engineer, but, you know, I was on an outside production shoot, or I was editing, or, you know, putting tapes together, just a whole variety of stuff. And what I found is something Ashley kind of hinted on, of, I call it systems thinking, where it's like, okay, I know this block, but hey, I'm noticing that it fits with this block that Anthony's working on. And then we put these two together, and then that ties into this block over here that Ashley's got going. And oh, well, while we're in the middle of this, hey, Laura's story would be a great fit for all these things we're putting together. And so it's you really learn there's not especially a silo within TV. It's just there's lots of moving parts working in unison generally, sometimes arguing with one another, but not too much. And so that's the big thing, is just, you know, don't be afraid to find your passion, and don't listen when somebody says you can't.
Now, we may lose Laura here real quick, so I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to come back to all of you for some of these other questions. But Laura, real quick, was there any barrier that you remember that you faced, or, you know, any advice that you have in terms of overcoming some of these challenges when it comes to careers in media or really just in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's to make a living as a reporter in this moment in time is really challenging. The jobs are few and far between, and they tend to often not pay a living wage, which is crazy that we are at this point in the world. Working for a newspaper, you're barely paying your bills. So aside from like the job market challenges, I think that there have definitely been times in my life where people have discouraged me from journalism, even, people who I love, who love me and care about my well-being, have been like, don't go into journalism, or isn't it time you leave journalism? And I think kind of along the lines of what Mike was saying, like, if this is your path, don't listen to anybody else, even the people who love you, who want what's best for you or feel that they have ideas of who you should be. If you're on a path that's really driven by your passion and your curiosity, and you can make a living or find a way to do this, I just don't think that you should let anybody stop you. And there are challenges, and you find your support networks, you find colleagues who feel similarly, you find member organizations that can help you with tools or support or camaraderie. And so don't listen to anybody.
Well, I'm going to push back a teeny bit on that one, because I did listen to my dad once. And he was not big on giving a lot of advice. He was really great about always saying, you go do what you love. He did what he loved, and he was very successful at it. And it wasn't what he trained. He was like Anthony. He started off with a degree in physical education. He was going to be a track coach. And he ended up in the Air Force as the senior navigator with more flying hours than just about anybody else in the Air Force, and was a pilot his whole life. And that turned into his passion. Right. And he didn't listen to his dad, and he didn't listen to a lot of people. And he never really gave me a lot of advice. So, my big barrier in all of this was I was a smart kid. I actually, went to the International Science Fair in the junior high in my junior year of high school, and I placed second at the Regional Science Fair in my senior year. And I was like number 6 in my high school graduating class for grades, and I went to college and I had 0 study skills because I was a smart kid who never had to work, and I tanked, and I got kicked out of college. My grades were so bad, and I was having so much fun working at the local PBS station. I was skipping class to go play with cameras. Sorry, Anthony, but to go do all this fun stuff that I love, that I skipped classes, and my grades were absolutely horrible, and they literally kicked me out of school. Surprise, general manager of PBS station, almost didn't graduate from college. And my dad's advice to me, after a few years of me being a cameraman, making minimum wage at a local news station, and seeing my future as like, I guess I'm going to be a minimum wage cameraman at a local news station for the rest of my life, he said, get a degree. Just go back and get your degree. You still have a few years of good grades. Take those, build on that. And for once, I actually took his advice. And I did go back, and I had a full-time job working at the local PBS station in Tucson. And I worked full-time, and I went a class or 2 at night, and it took me 8 years, but I got that degree. And that's why I am actually here, because that was going to be the big impediment for me, not having that degree. Now, you do not need a degree for everything in television, but the path I was taking, and I will, at some point I wanted to be a manager, and I was working at a university licensed television station, and universities value degrees. That was the thing. If you want to be in management, you have to have a degree. And there was a gentleman who was actually doing this job I was applying for, but he didn't have a degree, so they wouldn't give him the job full time. They hired me instead. And that one thing, that is what made that difference. And it's not fair necessarily, but this is where things will be in life. There will be impediments that if you're just willing to do this thing that you don't like, and believe me, I didn't like college. I did not have a great college experience, that, me. But I got through it, and I got that one thing out of the way, and that left paths open to me. That left many, many, many opportunities open to me. So that was the barrier I had, mostly self-imposed. terrible study habits, and a lack of motivation to, go into class and get things done until I grew up a little bit. So I've counseled any number of students in the meantime who were on a similar path to me to not go down that path, to take the time and, put the time in and get that degree and get it out of the way and move on with your life. Mike, how about you? What impediments have you run into?
Well, I mean, some of it was that actually, the early ones is the one, Laura had mentioned when she was talking before was, my family looking at me going, you're going to do what? In their defense, by the time I went to broadcasting school, it was like my umpteenth, oh, this is what I'm going to do for a living, a choice on things. And it wasn't until I'd been in the business about 5 or 6 years that I finally, well, gee, I guess he's sticking at it. Maybe we should quit laughing at him for it. And then it was in terms of learning the technology. I mean, I didn't initially have my sights on being in any kind of management role, but I was wanting to learn more about how the technology worked, learn more about how the departments work together. And, that meant going back to school, because where a lot of the guys had been trained just like you were talking about, Franz, of just, knock on doors till, somebody was desperate for a warm body and hired me. It was to move into anything required a degree or some kind of training. So I was literally doing the same thing for both my associates and my bachelor's. It was work full time, go to school at night. And it was, started with an associate's in electronics, watching computer technology take over broadcasting completely. It's like, okay, time for a bachelor's, but I don't think more electronics is going to help. Computers are having a big impact. Let's go that way. And ended up being a very good choice, mainly because of one class, systems analysis. And that was the one where I learned to kind of step back and realize that there were all these components that went together. What I was mentioning before about how, well, gee, to put this together, I need the video from Anthony. I need the story from Laura. I need the web presence that Ashley can help me with. And I need to be telling a story that's not going to put our viewers to sleep. And so, rolling all that into one was a whole bunch of what I learned in the systems class. And it was, really was, I think, to short answer your question, Franz, is somewhat a matter of perseverance. And again, back to not listening to the naysayers and recognizing, okay, I got to get over myself, grow up a little. Maybe this degree is stupid and doesn't mean anything, but if it's what the industry requires, reality wins. Go get your degree.
Sometimes that's what it is. Anthony, how about you? Any barriers you can think of that you faced, moving forward and getting to the point you are now?
Well, I often like to tell the story that, I went off to college and got a bachelor's of science. And when I got done, I didn't want to go PE teach. So I actually went to community college after that and kind of followed some passion I had with computer animation, and 3D animation was really big at the time. And I learned a lot of the skills that actually enabled me to get the job I have now. And so I often like to say that I learned all the skills I needed for my job at a community college. And yet there's been many times where if I didn't have a bachelor's degree, I would have hit that glass ceiling and I wouldn't have been able to continue progressing through my career. And so, I really feel like there's a lot of sensational stories of people who come out of high school and are self-made and don't need college and, become amazingly successful. And that's fine. But, I really like to think that if you don't know exactly what you want to do, or you're trying to buy some time or go into some, different interests, pardon me, going to college for an associate's or, aspiring to get a bachelor's in anything, that will serve you so well in your future, because there are those glass ceilings that you may face depending on where you go. And it would be terrible if you couldn't take that next opportunity because you didn't have that piece of paper. So, I really think that while you're figuring it out, it really can't hurt to go to school and continue learning, because the thought of me going back to school now is, you know, I really wouldn't want to do that. But while you're been in school your whole life, you know, keep going, you know, keep pushing through, and eventually all those different interests and those things, that they'll make sense, and it's going to come together and you know, really benefit you.
You know, it's interesting. I'm one of the few people I know in television that has a degree in radio television. And honestly, that was more because I was already doing television. And it was pretty obvious when I'm going to go back to school and get a degree. Well, why don't you get a degree in what you're already really good at? I'd been working in television professionally for, you know, at least 6-7 years at the time I started, came back to college after getting booted out and came back. So most of the people I know in television did not get it. In fact, there aren't a whole lot of television degrees out there, right? A lot of, particularly journalists, very few journalists go into it and become journalists after coming out of a television program. Oftentimes they are anthropologists or psychology majors, or I mean, just name it. There's a whole gamut. I don't know how one gets a degree in web design. Maybe there is one. Mike, I don't know, you might be more like me, that you actually followed a path so slightly more linear in terms of actually getting a degree in something that is more related to what you do. But of all of us, I think you have more degrees than anybody. So why don't you speak to that a little bit? I think you've got at least one master's, or are you now on 2?
No, it just, well, within graduate degrees, there's, you know, at the PhD level, I'm sure you guys have heard the all but doctorate.
Mhm.
At the master's level, I'm all but thesis.
Okay.
I spent a year arguing with my
Laura too, apparently.
you know, spent a year arguing with C&J about my thesis topic, which was the spectrum grab by the FCC.
Oh.
And they said it wasn't relevant to communication. So after a year, I threw in the towel and just said, I'm done.
Okay.
But to answer your question, it was interesting in the fact that, you know, there was degrees in electronics and different ones in technology, but actually nothing specific to television. In terms of, and believe me, I looked, the closest I found was at the time, one of the local universities had master's degree coursework on microwave transmitters. That was as close as it got. It was that, or get a bachelor of arts in production, which, you know, in retrospect, I probably could have tested out of about half of it, but just wasn't fitting what I needed at the time. So I thought, well, all right, you know, technology tends to be this kind of big umbrella or big pond, if you will. So what doesn't apply to what I'm doing, I'm sure I can adapt. And it, you know, it just, I was lucky it happened to work out fairly well. And that when I finished my associate's degree, there was a new TV station signing on in Denver. So I got to go to work there and literally learn how to build a TV station from the ground up, which the electronics degree was invaluable for. And then with the computer degree, computer systems, my bachelor's, it ended up being the same thing. About the time I was studying it was when information technology started really making inroads in broadcasting and how it worked. And it wasn't real hard to look at a tape machine that, okay, this requires an overhaul every 500 hours. Next to it sits a video server that not only made better pictures, you know, had a, you know, 2 million hours between head failures. So it's like, okay, yeah, it's going to go this way. I'm going to do a lot better knowing about computers and systems than I am about electronics per se. So it was where it didn't specifically apply. It, you know, it gave me a foundation and a background that I was able to adapt and grow from, you know, from there.
Ashley, how about you? I mean, think in terms of barriers and what seemed to get in your way and how did you get past it?
Yeah, I didn't realize that we had such similar stories, Franz.
Uh-oh.
But I know. But you know, I said I spent all my time in high school in the dark room, which included not going to the other classes that I was supposed to be going to, which was kind of a problem. So I actually had great grades, but I just didn't like to go to them because all I wanted to do was photography. So I almost didn't graduate high school. I think my mother almost murdered me. But I started going to class. I was able to graduate, which was great. So that worked out. And then I didn't think that I wasn't planning on going to college initially, no one in my family had gone to college before. I come from a long line of like corn manufacturers from Iowa. So I got a job as a portrait photographer, and I was like, great, this is what I'm going to do. And then my love for photography, I was like, well, maybe I should get a degree in this. So I started, going nights and weekends and doing as much online coursework as I can through the community college and then through UNM. And then I got to the point where I couldn't do work full time and go to school anymore because the coursework just required me to be in person to get an art degree. So then I went to school full time. So I would say that I got in my own way a little bit in the beginning because I didn't want to like jump through those hoops per se. I just wanted to be an artist, but I will say that like jumping through the hoops can be really beneficial because again, I think, it doesn't necessarily matter what degree you have. It's just so important to get a bachelor's degree and go to school. And, it just kind of teaches you how to exist in the system and, get jobs and also find that support too.
So we're all here because of the idea, the acronym STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, math, and for us, STEM H and health sciences. But all of us have that in common. All of us are, at some level in what we do every day, we're using science, technology, engineering, and or math. We're using some combination of these things. Now, I mean, I can look at Mike particularly and Anthony, and both of you, the technology part is fairly obvious, but I just kind of curious, how do you guys see these different parts of science, technology, engineering, math playing a role in what you do at New Mexico PBS? Anthony, how about you?
Well, when we're telling journalistic stories, we really have to wrap our minds around these issues. And sometimes they can be pretty dense, pretty complicated. We have a joke that we say, when we're going to tell, say, a science story, we say, well, what level are we going to come in at? Who are we explaining this to? Are we explaining this to really knowledgeable people, or are we doing this for, and we call it rocks for jocks? How much do we need to dumb this down? And so, it's really important. And part of what I really love about our job is we have to really be able to understand these topics that we're dealing with in order to then tell them. And, that kind of exercise, really kind of continues to make us, I think, deeper thinkers. I used to not care at all about politics, but I'm now working on making news shows, and we're consistently talking to legislators and lawmakers and politicians, and we're trying to inform the public about some very important issues. And in order to do that, we've got to understand it. And I think in general, I hope that I've become a more well-rounded person, someone who kind of has enough knowledge in certain areas to be able to, exist around others that are very smart, or have decent conversations with people, and maybe hopefully be a little more interesting, even if it's not necessarily something where, a math equation that I'm using every day. But, we can get very deep in the weeds with television technology, camera sensors, color science, computer editing, and graphics and things. It can get really pretty deep in the weeds. But I came at it from an artistic side. I'm the product of starving artists, and I wanted a field that I could be creative in, but I wanted a paycheck. I wanted benefits. And so I feel like I found a place in this world that kind of gave me that. It was a little bit different from my parents, who, it was like, well, I hope I sell something. So that's kind of what led me into it. And I look back at my college degree, and, a lot of it doesn't relate to necessarily what I do every day, but it sure did help inform me and, create hopefully what I feel like is a pretty well-rounded individual.
And I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about that, Anthony, because I'm familiar with your background and your parents, and and when you came to us, you were really interested in 3D animation, but you definitely approached everything with this very artistic sense, right? Which I didn't have. And I really thought, wow, that's it's such a neat way to look at the world, because I didn't see the world through those same lenses. And then the solutions that you would come up with and the ways you would approach things. And then when I saw it on the screen, right, that this combination of that art and that science all kind of coming together. And it also struck me, and I remember thinking about this at the time, Anthony, that I don't think I've ever told you this, that you've become actually an absolutely wonderful lighting designer. This is another one of Anthony's skill sets, is working with light. Now, when I was doing that, I approached it a bit differently. It was a bit more of a journeyman approach to it, but I can remember very clearly, you had to be in television still, and then you had to be very careful about how much light went where. And you were always worried about what angle the light was coming in at, and that light causes shadows, and where were those shadows going to fall. All of this stuff had to be figured out. I remember very clearly going back to my high school physics book, which I still happen to have, and looking up those concepts of refraction and looking up color temperature. And what did that mean? That there were different colors of light, and that those were going to impact those camera sensors that Anthony's talking about in different ways. And if I used this kind of light, the picture was going to have a bluish cast. And if I used that kind of light, it was going to have a yellowish cast to it. And that all those things mattered. And in fact, not only did they mattered a lot, because when that image was up on the screen, it was really obvious, even when it wasn't as obvious to the naked eye. So even those areas where, you don't necessarily see this as a science or a science experiment, all that science started getting pulled in and at some very, very deep levels, to the point that, yeah, I had to go back and revisit my my physics classes and relearn some of the physics that I'd forgotten. I was actually pretty good in high school physics. It was college physics where I started to fall apart a little bit. Mike, how about you? Now, you're probably the most STEM of all of us in the more traditional sense, because you are actually an engineer.
Well, it's, yeah, I am, in the sense of, okay, my degrees all lean that way. But I'm going to borrow from, what Anthony was saying about being well-rounded. Because I discovered very early on, I could, reel off some technobabble description about what the problem was, and all I would effectively do was make eyes glaze over. I wasn't communicating what the problem was. And, so now I brag about being a technologist who speaks English, which, this seems to be kind of rare at times. But, it's helped me because I'm able to understand sort of how the other half lives. Some of it having worked that side of the fence and knowing what's involved. But at the same time, I've always insisted technology is a tool, not a crutch. However we're applying it, it needs to be making what we do better, not just technology for technology's sake. And, so I'll take the example you were talking about, Franz, with, the color temperature and things like that with cameras, of understanding, okay, there were different things I could use the technology to adapt what wasn't a great lighting situation and still have the picture come out okay. And when the producer or the editor, photographer, whomever I might have been working with at the time says, oh, that looks a lot better, what did you do? Be able to explain it to them. So if they were out in a field shoot and didn't have the luxury of tweaking with circuits, being able to understand, okay, it was this, that, something else. Hey, that makes sense. I can make that work. And being able to apply it that way. And because at the end of the day, it was about making video go out the door. And that was, one of actually, it was somebody in engineering who told me this is, check your ego at the door. You'll get a lot more work done.
Okay, Ashley, we're wrapping up here, so why don't you take us out here? STEM, what's it mean in your world?
Yeah, I think, I was trying to think of things that I do that don't involve technology. And I think that all the things I do involve technology. In my previous role as the web designer, we created a whole new website. I love being able to do the coding and that back end stuff. I think if you're in high school and you're curious, just like learn how to code something. Like it's so fun to see, like learn, it's like learning another language. But yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. I think that everything I do involves technology in some way. And I think it's being curious about how to make, do X and make Y happen. That's really driven what I do is like, how can we do this? How can we make it better? How can we make it function better for the end user? How can we make our website function better for people? Just being curious about all of that stuff and asking those questions.
And I'm just going to make one last point then, a real quick one, because it kind of piggybacks a little bit on Ashley. And Ashley and I share one thing. We're both data nuts. We love data. We love numbers, and we're sharing these things all the time. And I'm still surprised at the point I am now, general manager. I don't get to use the tools that Anthony does anymore. They don't let me play with the camera as much anymore. I edit stuff on my iPhone just so I can still edit things. So, so general managers don't get to do that fun stuff. But every day I'm using statistics. Every day I am looking at ratings. Every day I'm looking at web viewership numbers that Ashley is feeding me and balancing that against, where should we put resources somewhere else. So every day I'm still using fairly high level math. And of course I'm using the technology. We're using it right now as we're talking to all of you. So, as far removed as we may get from STEM, we're always going to be very, very closely tied to STEM because it's part of our everyday lives. And the more you embrace it and the more you learn about it, the more fun you're going to have and the more interesting things you're going to do. Thank you all very much. This has been a great conversation. I learned more about you, and I've worked with you guys for many years, and I still didn't know some of this stuff. So it's really kind of great to hear. So thank you all very, very much.
Awesome. Thank you also from the STEM Center, and hope to see you guys again soon.